Jerome Carter presses his back against the cold wall of the supply closet, breath caught in his throat, while heavy footsteps echo down the hallway just yards away. His hands shake as he grips a ring of keys that could either save lives or seal his fate. Through the glass door, he sees blood on the floor where just minutes before there had been teenagers laughing and joking around. The silence is broken by a muffled sob, a girl hiding under the staircase, the same one who always greeted him with a genuine smile every morning. Jerome closes his eyes, remembering the promise he made at his wife's deathbed: protect those who can't protect themselves. He knows every inch of this building better than the architect himself, every secret passage, every escape route that nobody else knows exists. But using that knowledge means leaving Mama Rose alone at home, waiting for the insulin he can barely afford to buy. Jerome clenches his calloused fists, knowing that in the next few seconds, he'll make the most important decision of his 58 years, a decision that will reveal to the entire world who the man everyone has ignored really is. Somewhere in the building, a 17-year-old boy walks through the hallways carrying the weight of a lifetime of rejection, a gun in his trembling hands and tears streaming down his face. This young man is Tyler Morrison, grandson of multimillionaire Harrison Blackstone, the same Harrison whose brother Richard destroyed Jerome's life 3 years ago, firing him from his respected supervisor position to turn him into the invisible cleaner he is today. Tyler doesn't know he's about to meet the only person in the school who truly sees beyond appearances, who knows the pain of being thrown away like garbage by people who consider themselves superior. Jerome takes a deep breath, whispers a prayer that Mama Rose taught him, and takes his first step toward the hallway. What happens in the next 47 minutes will change not only his life, but reveal a connection between him and the shooter that not even the most powerful multimillionaire in Spokane could imagine. Because sometimes, real heroes hide in places where nobody thinks to look. 6 hours before that moment of terror, Jerome Carter was driving his 1998 Ford F-150 through the quiet streets of Spokane at 5:30 in the morning, just like he'd done religiously for 3 years. The dashboard showed a temperature of -8 degrees Fahrenheit, but the heater that broke 2 months ago forced Jerome to drive wearing a thick coat and fingerless gloves that let him hold his work tools without losing the dexterity that decades of experience had developed. On the passenger seat sat a lunch packed by Mama Rose the night before: bologna sandwich, mashed banana, and coffee in a cracked thermos. Jerome knew exactly how much each item in that meal cost: $3.47, including the sugar that Mama Rose insisted on putting in the coffee because a working man needs energy. While driving, Jerome mentally went over the numbers that ruled his life: $1,200 monthly salary as a cleaner, $450 rent for the house where he lived with Mama Rose, $400 for her insulin, $180 for blood pressure medication, $120 for basic groceries. That left $50 for gas, clothes, and any emergency that might come up. Jerome never complained, but sometimes, driving in the darkness of those cold mornings, he allowed himself to remember the times when he earned $4,200 monthly as the maintenance supervisor at this same school. Parking in the spot reserved for support staff, far from the imported cars of teachers and administrators, Jerome greeted Tom Wilson, the night security guard finishing his shift. Tom was another veteran who'd served in Afghanistan while Jerome fought in Iraq, and between them existed the silent understanding of men who'd seen the real world beyond the protected walls of academia. "How's Mama Rose doing?" Tom asked, because in Spokane's working-class community, taking care of the elderly was everybody's business. "Diabetes hit her hard again yesterday," Jerome replied, tucking into his pocket the crumpled paper with notes about new insulin prices. Tom shook his head. They both knew families destroyed by medical bills. Jerome entered the building using his employee key, greeted Maria Santos in the kitchen, a 45-year-old Mexican immigrant who'd been working since 4 in the morning preparing breakfast for 850 privileged students. Maria always saved an extra coffee for Jerome, served in a disposable plastic cup, but offered with genuine warmth that heated him more than the drink itself. Jerome knew that Maria sent $600 monthly to 3 children in Mexico, that she worked 12 hours a day to support dreams she'd probably never achieve. They talked in English mixed with Spanish, a language Jerome had learned during years working alongside honest immigrants that Spokane's elite preferred to ignore. During 3 years cleaning Riverside Academy, Jerome Carter had become part of the furniture, invisible to administrators, teachers, and wealthy parents, but deeply connected to the students who really mattered to him. Sarah Mitchell, 16 years old, always arrived at 6:45 to study in the library because at home she had 3 younger siblings and no quiet place to concentrate. Jerome knew this because 2 years ago, he found Sarah crying in the girls' bathroom after rich classmates made fun of her thrift store clothes. "My mom works 3 jobs to keep me here," Sarah had confided, and since then Jerome made sure to greet her every morning, asking about her studies, offering words of encouragement that no adult in her life had given her. Marcus Johnson, a 17-year-old athlete who played basketball on scholarship, often stayed at school late because home meant facing his alcoholic father who blamed his son for the divorce. Jerome knew the story because he found Marcus sleeping in the gym on Mondays after particularly rough weekends. Without fanfare, Jerome started leaving extra sandwiches in Marcus's locker, along with simple notes. "You're stronger than you know." These were small gestures that Jerome had learned from Mama Rose, who always said that kindness costs nothing but means everything. Emily Rodriguez, daughter of a Mexican family that cleaned the houses of wealthy students, suffered constant bullying for her accent and simple clothes. Jerome noticed because Emily always kept her head down when walking through the hallways, trying to become invisible just like he himself had learned to do. What these students didn't know was that Jerome Carter possessed technical knowledge and military experience that surpassed any school administrator. A mechanical engineering graduate from the University of Washington on a military scholarship, Jerome had served 12 years in the Army as a security systems and construction specialist, participating in missions in Iraq, where he learned to navigate dangerous territories, assess threats, and protect civilians in combat situations. When he returned to Spokane in 2009, Jerome was hired as Riverside Academy's maintenance supervisor with a salary of $4,200 monthly, responsibility over 15 employees, and universal respect. Jerome transformed the school's security systems, installed new emergency protocols, mapped every inch of the building, including service passages that not even the original architects remembered existed. For 8 years, Jerome was the most competent and respected employee at the institution, known for his ability to solve any technical problem and for the natural leadership that inspired other workers. His wife Linda was alive then, working as a nurse at the local hospital, and together they maintained a dignified life, respectable middle class with retirement plans and achievable dreams. Jerome was an active community member, church volunteer, respected by neighbors as an upright man who built everything through honest work. That life ended abruptly in March 2019, when Richard Blackstone took over as CEO of the educational corporation that ran the school. Richard Blackstone arrived with an MBA from Harvard, 35 years old, no experience in education, and an obsession with cost optimization that would impress investors. In his first administrative meeting, Richard announced 30% cuts in operational staff salaries, elimination of health benefits for manual workers, and layoffs of unnecessary supervisors who could be replaced by cheaper outsourced workers. Jerome tried to explain that his position was essential for maintaining security systems, that he knew the building like nobody else, that his military experience was valuable for emergency protocols. Richard interrupted him coldly. "Mr. Carter, anybody can push a mop. We don't need to pay $4,200 for basic cleaning services." Jerome felt his blood freeze when he realized that 8 years of competence, dedication, and respect had been reduced to pushing a mop in that arrogant young man's mind. Jerome tried to argue, presenting data about improvements he'd implemented, testimonials from employees he led, but Richard had already made his decision. "You can accept rehiring as a cleaner for $1,200 monthly, no benefits, or look for work elsewhere." Jerome needed to work. Linda was starting cancer treatment, Mama Rose depended on him financially, and at 55, starting a new career in Spokane would be nearly impossible. Jerome swallowed the bitterest pride of his life and accepted becoming a cleaner at the school where he'd once been respected as a supervisor. The following months were the hardest Jerome had ever lived through. Linda fought breast cancer, undergoing chemotherapy treatments that cost $3,200 monthly even with lousy insurance, while Jerome worked double shifts, cleaner during the day, security at a shopping mall at night, to cover medical expenses that consumed every available penny. Jerome sold personal belongings, canceled retirement plans, took out loans he knew would be hard to pay back, all to keep Linda in treatment. During this period, Jerome continued working at Riverside Academy, cleaning the same hallways where he'd once been greeted with respect, now invisible to colleagues who witnessed his public humiliation. Richard Blackstone occasionally walked past Jerome without even recognizing him as a human being, treating him like disposable equipment that served a basic function. Jerome endured everything in silence, focused solely on keeping Linda alive and Mama Rose cared for. Linda passed away in January 2021, after 2 years fighting a disease that could have been treated more effectively if Jerome still had adequate health insurance. Jerome never blamed anyone publicly, but he knew that Richard Blackstone had directly contributed to his wife's death by destroying his financial stability at the most critical moment. Since then, Jerome worked only to survive and care for Mama Rose, swallowing pain and injustice because men like him didn't have the luxury of rebelling against a system that crushed them silently. When Jerome Carter stepped out of the supply closet that Tuesday morning, March 15th, his military experience kicked in instantly. The sounds he heard, sporadic gunshots, running footsteps, muffled screams, created a precise mental map of the situation. Jerome knew that police would take at least 12 minutes to surround the building, plus 8 more minutes for tactical entry, during which students would be completely vulnerable. His training in Iraq taught him that the first 20 minutes of any emergency are the responsibility of whoever's present, not whoever's coming. Jerome made the decision that would change everything. Use his intimate knowledge of the building to evacuate students before authorities took control. He started with the library, where he knew Sarah Mitchell studied every morning. Using the maintenance passage that connected the supply closet to the basement, Jerome emerged silently behind the bookshelves, finding 8 students hidden among tables, terrified and paralyzed. "Follow me without making noise," Jerome whispered, using the command tone he'd learned leading soldiers in war zones. Sarah recognized him immediately, and her expression of terror transformed into relief. Jerome Carter had never let her down. One by one, Jerome guided the students through routes that only he knew. Ventilation ducts wide enough for people to pass through, service stairs hidden behind false panels, maintenance corridors that bypassed the building's main areas. For 30 minutes of silent operation, Jerome saved groups of students using tactics learned in urban combat: coordinated movement, communication through gestures, use of familiar terrain to avoid direct confrontation. Marcus Johnson was trapped in the gymnasium with 6 teammates when Jerome appeared through the emergency door he always kept unlocked. "Coach Carter?" Marcus whispered, using the affectionate nickname the basketball team had given Jerome after he fixed broken equipment that the administration had ignored for months. Jerome coordinated the evacuation through the back exit, leading the group to a safe area where other students awaited instructions. Emily Rodriguez was hiding in the chemistry lab with 4 classmates when Jerome arrived, crawling through the air conditioning duct, emerging silently behind the teacher. Emily smiled through her tears. Jerome had always treated her with dignity when others ignored her. Systematically, Jerome emptied the building using routes he'd planned years ago as security supervisor. Routes that Richard Blackstone had considered unnecessary details when he took control of the school. Each student saved reinforced Jerome's conviction. His life had prepared him for this moment, when technical knowledge, military experience, and genuine love for children would combine to make a real difference. Jerome wasn't thinking about heroism or recognition. He was thinking only of Mama Rose saying that life has purpose when we serve others, especially those society considers less important. When Jerome finally came face to face with Tyler Morrison in the main hallway, he immediately recognized signs he'd learned to identify in soldiers having emotional breakdowns: hands shaking uncontrollably, irregular breathing, the lost look of someone who'd crossed their psychological limit. Tyler held the gun like it was a foreign object, tears streaming down his face, body swaying slightly back and forth. Jerome had seen this posture in young soldiers who broke under combat pressure. They weren't enemies. They were victims who needed immediate help. "Tyler," Jerome said with the calm voice he'd learned to use with recruits in crisis, "I know who you are, son. You always say thank you when I clean your table in the library." Tyler stopped, confused, because nobody at school really saw him as a person. He was just the multimillionaire's grandson to administrators, rich kid to students, investment to family. But Jerome knew him because Jerome paid attention to every child, even those others considered too privileged to deserve compassion. "You study military history," Jerome continued, taking a careful step toward the young man. "I've seen the books on your desk. Always wanted to talk to you about that, because I served in Iraq. Tyler lowered the gun slightly. Nobody had ever shown genuine interest in his hobbies. Jerome kept talking, using de-escalation techniques learned dealing with traumatized civilians. Low voice, slow movements, focus on human connection instead of confrontation. I know you're hurting, Jerome said. I know what it's like to feel like nobody really cares about you, that your life doesn't matter to the people who should love you. For 22 minutes, that felt like eternity. Jerome Carter talked with Tyler Morrison about pain, loneliness, and the human need to be seen as a real person instead of a symbol or expectation. Jerome shared his own story of rejection and humiliation, explaining how Richard Blackstone had thrown him away like garbage after years of dedicated service, how he'd lost his wife partly because he couldn't afford proper treatment after losing his position and benefits. Broken systems hurt all of us, Jerome said, rich and poor, young and old. The difference is that some of us learn that hurting others doesn't heal our own pain. Tyler listened like he'd never listened to anyone. Jerome spoke truth that his multimillionaire family had never dared to voice. Slowly, Tyler lowered the gun, then placed it on the floor, finally allowed Jerome to approach. Nobody's going to care if I die, Tyler whispered. I care, Jerome replied, hugging the young man like a father would embrace a lost son. Your life has value that goes way beyond your family's money. When Jerome hugged Tyler, he felt the boy's body completely relax, all tension and anger transforming into profound relief at finally being seen as a human being. Tyler had found the first person in his life who truly knew him, who cared about his feelings instead of his social expectations. Jerome held Tyler until the SWAT team arrived, ensuring the young man would be treated as a victim needing medical help, not as a criminal. Harrison Blackstone arrived at Riverside Academy in a convoy of 3 armored SUVs, accompanied by lawyers, press assistants, and private medical staff. At 73 years old, Harrison had built a real estate empire worth $2.8 billion by controlling every aspect of life through financial power. But he discovered a situation that money couldn't solve. His grandson Tyler was alive. 20 students had been saved without a single death, and it was all thanks to a man Harrison didn't even know existed. When he learned that the anonymous hero was Jerome Carter, Harrison demanded an immediate meeting to understand how a simple cleaner had demonstrated competence that his trained security teams didn't possess. Richard Blackstone, present at the meeting, turned pale instantly upon hearing Jerome's name. Richard had tried to bury the memory of the supervisor he'd cruelly fired, but now faced the consequences of his decisions. Harrison discovered the complete story. Jerome wasn't a simple cleaner, but a military veteran with mechanical engineering, a respected former supervisor whom Richard had demoted to cut costs, a man whose competence and knowledge of the building had saved Harrison's own grandson's life. You fired the man who saved my grandson? Harrison asked, his voice loaded with fury that Richard had never witnessed. Harrison Blackstone had built his fortune exploiting workers, but had never faced such direct and personal consequences of his corporate policies. Jerome Carter represented everything Harrison had ignored for decades. Competence destroyed by greed, human dignity sacrificed for marginal profits, real lives crushed by decisions made in distant boardrooms. Harrison Blackstone did something unprecedented in his 73 years. He asked to speak personally with Jerome Carter, not as a CEO talking to an employee, but as a grateful grandfather talking to the man who saved his family. Jerome arrived at the meeting still wearing his stained cleaner's uniform, hands dirty from cleaning, with no expectation beyond explaining what had happened. Harrison expected to find someone seeking reward or recognition, but Jerome simply reported events with genuine humility, asked about Tyler's mental state, offered continued help if the family needed it. Why did you risk your life? Harrison asked. Because they were kids who needed help, Jerome replied, as if the answer were obvious. You've got a wonderful grandson who just needs to know that someone truly cares about him. Harrison realized he was facing the type of man he thought he'd made extinct, someone who values human life above personal benefit, who acts correctly regardless of reward, who possesses practical wisdom acquired through real experience instead of academic theory. For the first time in decades, Harrison Blackstone felt deep shame about how he'd treated workers like Jerome. In that moment, Harrison made the decision that would change everything. Jerome would be promoted immediately to security director with a salary of $85,000 annually, complete health insurance for him and Mama Rose, company-provided housing, and guaranteed retirement fund. More important than money, Harrison offered something Jerome hadn't received in years: genuine respect and public recognition of his worth. 8 months after that day that changed everything, Jerome Carter walked through the hallways of Riverside Academy, wearing a navy blue blazer with the security director emblem, greeted with respect by students, teachers, and administrators who now knew his real story. Mama Rose had received first-class medical treatment that completely controlled her diabetes, allowing her to live with the dignity and independence she deserved at 82 years old. Jerome bought a modest but comfortable house in a safe neighborhood, with a backyard where Mama Rose grew a vegetable garden that she shared with neighbors in need. Sarah Mitchell, now a senior, had received a full scholarship to the University of Washington after Jerome's personal recommendation, as he knew the young woman's academic potential better than any counselor. Marcus Johnson had become team captain and visited Jerome regularly, calling him Coach Carter, with genuine affection. Emily Rodriguez flourished academically after Jerome implemented an anti-bullying program that protected vulnerable students, creating an environment where differences were celebrated instead of attacked. Tyler Morrison had completed an intensive psychological treatment program and maintained a close relationship with his grandfather Harrison, who learned the importance of emotional family connection. Tyler also developed a special friendship with Jerome, who became the father figure the young man had never had, someone who saw him as a valuable person regardless of family money. Harrison Blackstone completely transformed his corporate philosophy after learning a lesson that no business school teaches: true human value cannot be measured in financial spreadsheets. Harrison implemented new salary standards that guaranteed dignified life for all employees, created development programs that promoted experienced workers like Jerome instead of replacing them with cheap alternatives, established emergency medical funds that protected employee families against health crises. Richard Blackstone was removed from all executive positions. Harrison discovered that his brother's cruel decisions had caused unnecessary suffering for dozens of working families. Jerome Carter became the leadership model that Harrison promoted in all his companies: competence based on real experience, integrity demonstrated through consistent actions, moral courage to do what's right even when it costs dearly personally. Jerome's story spread through Spokane's business community, inspiring other CEOs to reevaluate how they treated operational employees. Jerome never sought fame or public recognition, but his story proved a fundamental truth that American society had forgotten. Real heroism comes from ordinary people who choose to put others' welfare above personal safety, who demonstrate values through daily actions instead of empty words, who build strong communities by protecting the most vulnerable members. Jerome Carter saved more than 20 lives that terrible day. He saved the idea that goodness still matters, that experience deserves respect, that honest workers are the foundation of civilized society.